manager. This computer. All right, now we're recording. So tonight we're going to talk about, let me get this here.
I'm on yours, right?
All right, so now we're going to talk about the global international environment, planning and strategy, designing organizational structure and organizational control, how we control these organizations. So we'll start out internationally, then we'll kind of drill right down to the employee level tonight. And feel free to stop me anytime, ask questions. Can you see my screen okay? Can you see the PowerPoints?
It just says Zoom, join a meeting or sign in right now.
Okay, not, okay. Let me, new share. All right, thanks. Now we got it?
Yeah.
Managing the global environment, okay. So these are pretty simple slides I pulled up from one of my classes, so we'll kind of go through them pretty fast. But sort of, but feel free to chime in if you have any questions. And most of you guys have been in business for a while, so you're familiar with the whole idea. There's a global, they're not just a global environment, but a global infrastructure and global business, and that anything that happens to upset it, right, really has an influence on lots of things. And for the new, yeah, I got it. All right. Okay. It's down. So in management classes, we divide this up into two layers. We have our organization here, and we always talk about what goes on inside an organization. There's more of that tonight. But often we talk about the task environment, which is competitors, customers, suppliers, and distributors. Right? And companies understand we need to think about those kind of people and talk about them all the time. Much more likely to the health industry influence is the in general environment, which is things like technology changes, socio-cultural forces, things like the changes in people's habits, for instance, less smoking, that kind of thing, demographic issues, the aging of the workforce, the aging of the population, wealthy, the number of immigrants, non-immigrants, all those kind of things, political and legal forces, so changes in the laws, changes in politics, which certainly have a huge influence these days, particularly in the health industry, and then the general economy, all the economic forces, including tariffs with China and all of those things, right? So most of you are somewhat experienced in business, so you kind of got the idea that you need to keep track of these things, even though it's a lot of work. This is why people read the Wall Street Journal. It's why they read any number of business magazines and try to keep up to date on what's going on and how that might influence your business. And that's certainly a part of the workload on managers today to keep up on all these things. And I would say some of you act as consultants, and anything you can do to help managers, bring them information, explain what's going on, how that might affect them, right? They certainly see it as a help, not somebody sticking their nose in where it doesn't belong. At least most of them do, as far as I know. So we've kind of talked about the task environment already, right? Those are the things right around a company, like its suppliers and distributors and customers and competitors, that generally people spend a fair amount of time talking about. Global outsourcing, I got the idea. In class, sometimes divide these five forces, divide these five forces so that students can remember easy. Social things, like the demographics of the people, technology forces, changes in the cloud and the internet and smartphones and all that kind of thing, how the economy is doing, environmental forces that are out there, rules that have to do with the environment and how companies interact with that, and anything political/legal, how that affects things going on. So again, lots to keep track of. We just kind of put it in categories to make it a little easier to keep track of. Other than the legal things, right, of this, what do you think would affect the healthcare industry the most? Or am I wrong there? Isn't the legal things not affecting the healthcare industry that much because there's not that many changes in, I mean, Congress isn't passing a lot of laws these days. There's not a lot of changes in the legal structure for the health industry. What do you guys think? Right. I remind you, if you're muted, right, you can either put your cursor on the top right corner of your picture to unmute or use the space bar. Hold it down for a second too, I think unmutes you. And then you can mute it again. Any thoughts about how these things are changing for the healthcare industry?
I'd say all of them are probably important. Maybe
maybe the political one. I mean, think about the pharmaceutical industry right now. You see Donald Trump made a little entree into trying to make inroads into the cost of pharmaceutical drugs, and then a quick pullback, then back again. I think political would be, they say the healthcare lobby is larger than all the other lobbies combined. So, I think that drives quite a bit of it.
Yeah, that's a tough one to overcome, quite frankly. When you have a lobby that big, right, it's going to be difficult for the other people, the users, basically, the clients of those people to make some headway. It's going to take a lot of it takes a long time to build up the political will, I think, to build up the inertia, to get Congress to finally take a stance. And we need enough is enough. We need to change this. And unfortunately, things have to get pretty bad before that kind of thing happens. Right? I mean, I can barely remember when the EPA started. Finally, people had enough of the environment being bad. And for those of you who don't know, I mean, the one that gets credit for I'm from Northern Ohio. The one that gets credit for breaking the camel's back is the Cuyahoga River that flows through Cleveland and the Lake Erie caught fire, like not once, but several times. So when you have burning rivers, you probably have a pollution problem someone needs to do something about. It wasn't a spill. It was just normal pollution that caught fire. So that's what helps get Cleveland the reputation it has today. But it takes a lot for people to get fed up with what's going on, I think, and to motivate Congress to do something, particularly when somebody else is motivating Congress to not do something. So.
Well, what's going to drive the whole change is the economics of it. It can't continue like it is.
Okay.
It's going to take everybody down, the companies and the personal.
Yeah. So Terry, so let's talk about that. So maybe the companies will say, look, we can't afford this anymore. And you think maybe they'll put pressure on Congress?
I don't know how a company puts pressure on Congress in the face of what the lobbying for the healthcare industry does. I think that my opinion is that you can only do something about your particular sphere of influence and take the steps that you can take. So that's why I think this curriculum is so important. Yeah,
it's interesting how I mean, when Tom was putting this together, how different it is than anything that's out there, right? So this is going to be really interesting to see where this goes. And I
agree with Terry. My biggest client, I just learned yesterday, got a 35% increase on renewal, and they just switched to this carrier last year. So.
And what was their justification for that?
Oh, they had a whole list of justifications, high claimants, and use, and they didn't really jump on the wellness program. It was their first year, so they have a whole list of excuses, but that's unacceptable.
Yeah, what a huge jump. And
there's no statistical evidence that the wellness programs provide anything positive.
Right. Even at our university, we were talking about we're one of the sort of self-insured people, and the head of finance made a comment about we had a bad year benefits wise, and it costed a lot of money to the college because there were a couple major surgeries. He said maybe we need to spend more time talking about the wellness program. And people are getting sick. We're all getting older. We're particularly, I mean, a lot of our faculty are really getting up there in years. So there's no avoiding it. There's going to be procedures that need to be done, whether it's hips or hearts or whatever. And wellness isn't going to steer around all that. I don't know. But so there's no really, Terry, there's no statistical, that's what I've heard. That's what you're hearing too.
I keep reading articles, and all of the articles are saying that there's no correlation between wellness programs and saving money, and there's little correlation between wellness programs and better health. And it's just my opinion, but I don't think most of these wellness programs understand nutrition at all. And we're just beginning to understand aging enough to kind of figure out what to do. So, and I believe that these wellness efforts are just another way for the insurance companies to spend money so that they can get another 20% on it. I know that's not a very positive point, but I just can't. I keep looking because we were under the same pressure. The group that we joined required us to do wellness steps. So many year one, so many in year two, et cetera. And so we've been trying to comply without getting to the point where we're making our employees do things that they're going to hate us for.
Right.
And I've been trying to find data that supports some kind of effort in that area, so we can at least pick something that somebody thinks is valuable that, you know, will actually get us somewhere. And I can't find anything. And I love it if somebody can tell me that I'm wrong, but everything that I am reading is saying that after years of wellness programs, we're getting no better.
I remember the HMO attempt in the 80s. And the idea was you were going to get wellness care and get to see a doctor really quickly and really inexpensively, but a different doctor every time. And that was going to make overall health care less expensive, right? And that was a tremendous flaw. That lasted only 3, 4, 5 years, something like that, and it was over. What they really did was make it harder to get major medical care in that program. They tried to save money that way, but that didn't. I was in Michigan at the time. That didn't get far.
The biggest impact, I think, on the industry so far that I can see is probably in this task environment circle that you showed us, where all the players, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, you know, all of the players have developed all these pathways and tools that impact the organization that's trying to respond to it in ways that the organization can't affect very easily. I mean, we're learning in this curriculum ways that you can make a difference, but mostly it's not apparent.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I have a colleague who studies how the stock market is kind of rigged against the small player, and it's kind of the same thing. It's a different style of rigging, but with the same ultimate goal in mind, right? We're going to stack the deck against people and make sure we get a bigger and bigger cut out of this thing. And sometimes people ask me, do I think companies will do the right thing so that the legislators don't get motivated to pass laws against them, to really rein them in more with requirements? And that's rare. It's rare that that's going to happen. Can you hear me okay? I just got a pop up. My internet wasn't so good.
No, would you say that sentence again?
The stock market is somewhat rigged against the small investors. Things like the big, the day-to-day traders, they have access to the servers right inside the building, so they get their computers get their information a little bit quicker than the outside computers, so they can make the changes, they can make the trades first and all of that. So it's just another idea of sort of insiders have rigged the game for they and their own people, and I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I mean, that's just the way it is, and it's tougher and tougher to get a fair cut at some of these things. It's not to say I don't invest in the stock market, I do, but I realize that there are certain parts of the stock market, like the very fast trading environment, that are rigged for the big players that have the inside track, and the little guy really shouldn't try to compete in that area because they have rigged in advantages against you. You just need to know that and steer clear of it. But I think you're right. I think the whole medical, I mean, I don't see how it's going to correct itself for a long, long time. That's what I've been trying to figure out, where the changes are coming from. I think you're just going to have to do what you're doing, dig in through the details, figure out the best you can do, and limit the damage until somehow, somewhere, the pendulum starts to move. All right, go forward a little bit. There we go. Well, this is sort of a definition of these forces. We can see social, technological, includes demographics, who's in the workforce, things like immigration, those type of things, technology, all the kind of things that are coming in the technology world, both medical and communications and all of that. Delivery services, you name it. Some of the demographics are part of the social. We talked about economics and environmental, both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. Those things affect all kind of environments, including, for instance, we used to talk about sort of almost as a joke, the danger of a tsunami in the Far East affecting some of your suppliers. And then when Japan, not the Thailand one, but the earlier one in Japan that knocked out the nuclear reactor and it took down a lot of the Japanese suppliers, there were any number of U.S. corporations that had to shut down production because they couldn't get their materials in from overseas, from Japan. And then we've been talking about all the political and legal forces, more regulation, less regulation, trade laws, taxes, all the kind of things that influence that type of environment. Okay. I really want to talk about GATT or free trade very much, other than the fact that until recently, until the last 3 years, there's been a steadily declining trade barriers, and now things have turned a little bit. And my guess is the minute we get somebody in the White House, things will shift back to the way they were. But that's just my guess. I really don't have any reason for saying that, other than the fact there's been so much inertia for a few decades here to lower and lower trade barriers that companies have gotten used to operating in that mode. They're set up to operate in that mode, and it would take a lot to shift them back away from that mode. That's sort of my observation of the international business. That's a graph I use in class. Basically, if you ever hear the theory of absolute advantages, that says you should do what's best for you and then trade for the other stuff. So if you're in Brazil, you should grow lots of coffee beans and trade with the US for iPhones. You shouldn't try to make your own cell phones and back and forth, right? So companies have the most advantage by doing what they're really efficient at and then trading for other things. And when we do that, when the globe does that, everybody ends up with more stuff. As opposed to if you say, I'm North Korea and I'm going to go it alone and try to do everything on my own, it's very difficult to do that. And we talked about NAFTA. I won't get into this much, but if you deal in international cultures, and I realize as soon as I say international cultures, the Germans are like this and the Japanese are like this, you get into the overstepping the generalities. And certainly if you think about the U.S., there's many different types of Americans that international outsiders of the U.S. would see looking at us. But in the pre-World War II in the 30s, IBM was doing a lot of international business, and particularly in Europe, and they realized not every country is different in terms of their national culture. So they asked this guy Hofstede to build, he's a psychologist in the Netherlands, to build a model that how they can measure the differences in international culture. So if you haven't heard of this one's kind of interesting. The guy's name is Hofstede. His first name is Geert, G-E-E-R-T. So if you type Geert into the internet, he's the first one that comes up because it's not a very common name. But we talk about the differences in national cultures. So for instance, I'll just run through these very quickly. So individualism versus collectivism. You would think of the Japanese as a very collective culture. Japan first, my family second, me third, kind of the way they think about it. U.S., it's very much I look out for myself and my own. So Australia, Canada would be more like the U.S. Collectivism would be much more like some parts of Indonesia and Japan. Less China. China's less so. Power distance is how society thinks it's okay to have difference in power strata. So in the U.S., we're theoretically all equal in front of the law. In some countries, if you're very wealthy, the laws don't much apply to you. If you get pulled in on a DUI, a little money here and there, next thing you know, you're home for the night, and that kind of thing. So about the only place with less power difference than the U.S. is Northern Europe. So the Scandinavian countries really are big on we're all equal in front of the law and everybody, and we're all equal, period, right? There shouldn't be any differences. And those tend to be very homogeneous societies. Higher power distances tend to be more in Central and South America and Russia, quite frankly. Achievement-oriented versus nurture-oriented. Sometimes this is called a masculinity, the achievement, and femininity is the nurturing. So what comes first, career or family, is kind of the difference there. So there's a measure of that in the different countries. That varies wildly as you move around Europe, by the way. It's kind of interesting. Low uncertainty avoidance and high uncertainty avoidance is your ability to tolerate risk. Not take risk, but tolerate risk. And so probably the lowest uncertainty, the high uncertainty avoidance, the people want to avoid any type of uncertainty are the Japanese again. They very much like to, and also other parts in the Pacific Rim, the Western Pacific Rim. And the low uncertainty avoidance, people who don't like to have a lot of rules around them and like a lot of uncertainty, more the US and Australia beats us in that category. High uncertainty avoidance people, the way you think of them is this. They like rules because when there's rules, I can follow the rules. And when I'm following the rules, I can be comfortable. I'm not going to get in trouble because that's the goal, to not get in trouble. So versus Australians, they don't like rules because they want to do whatever they want. In Japan, please tell me the rules and because I want to follow them and not get in trouble. And if there aren't rules, I get very concerned because now I don't have any guidelines for my behavior, and I could unwittingly do the wrong thing and then get in trouble, and then that would be bad. I would be disgraced by that, and I'd feel very bad about that. And then short-term, long orientation is just what it means. In the West, and particularly the U.S., we tend to be more short-term. Companies talk about quarterly earnings and those type of things. In the long term, you go into more of the Pacific Rim and a little bit in Europe. They tend to be better savers, and they talk about strategy not 3 years. They'll talk about it 5, 10, 15, to even 20 years out. And some companies even brag they have a 50-year strategy, which I don't know how useful that could be, quite frankly. If you think about what was going on 50 years ago versus now, I don't know. I don't know if you could make a claim that it'd be helpful to have a 50-year strategy 50 years ago. So we just kind of define these terms. So the whole idea is right, and it's kind of obvious. You guys, less so to my undergrad students, managers must be sensitive to the different value systems and norms in these different countries, and when you're on their home turf, behave accordingly. All right, so I kind of wanted to go through that kind of quickly. Planning and strategy. We'll spend a little more time on this chapter talking about strategy. So in terms of what's the difference between planning and strategy, you can kind of look here. Planning is setting appropriate goals and courses of action, right? Strategy is a whole cluster of decisions about what goals we're going to pursue, right? This is where we decide what goals we're going to go after. Most of you have heard of the mission statement. Sometimes I get the question, what's the difference between mission and vision, right? A mission is a broad declaration of an organization's purposes, right? And it could identify organization's products, but it doesn't have to. So why is the organization existing is what the mission statement should be about. The vision statement is our vision for the future. Where do we want to go? Right? And you'll find a lot of management gurus say these are absolutely vital to organizational success, and a lot of management gurus say no one knows what these are, no one pays attention to them. I double dog dare you to say the mission statement of your organization off the top of your head, right? And quite frankly, I couldn't do the University of Lynchburg. I could tell you parts of it, but I teach mission statements and still couldn't tell you. So that's all you need to know in that it's probably too much going on there. Right. By the way, the best mission statement I think I ever heard was 20 years ago. It's not their mission statement anymore. Nike's mission statement was beat Reebok. No, sorry, I got it wrong. 2 words and I didn't get it right. Their mission statement was crush Reebok. That was it. That's all you had to know at Nike, right? What was their goal? Crush Reebok. That's what they wanted to do. That was their mission statement.
I can't hear you.
It might be more of a vision statement, but it certainly was effective in telling everybody what the plan was, right? And not beat Reebok, not get ahead of Reebok, but crush them, right? So I think that was a key point. Right? And now, okay, I'm back.
Well, it says he's back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yay!
There he is.
We're about to dismiss class.
Yeah. Who pulled the fire alarm? Come on, fess up. So I live in Forest, Virginia, and we have Chantel, God bless us. And I don't think it's as bad as Comcast in Lynchburg, but sometimes we try. So my internet's been out since Friday. I just got it back today, and apparently it's a little wobbly yet. Okay. Hey, we're still recording. Okay. Let's go back. Share. See if I can back to the slides. Okay. So I'm actually have 2 different speeds in the house. I switched to the other frequency if that helps. Okay. All right, we finished chapter 4. That's right. We were. Did I close?
While you were away, we read through all the last 2 chapters.
You guys are quick. I got to give you that. You guys are moving right along.
What was the mission statement? We want to know the mission statement.
Oh, for the university? Actually, I went off to try to read it and I couldn't find it. No, I'm just kidding.
You said you ran into one 20 years ago you really liked.
Oh, sorry. That's where I dropped off? Okay,
yeah.
Yep. Let me, it was Nike. Nike's mission statement from 20 or even 30 years ago was crush Reebok. That was it. Crush Reebok. It's no longer the mission statement because anybody? They've done it, right?
They did it.
Yeah, they did it, right? And it wasn't beat Reebok. It wasn't get ahead of Reebok. It was crush Reebok. So it kind of tells you what to do. Yeah, they're in the sneaker war, right? But if Reebok makes athletic apparel, what should you do at Nike? You should make athletic apparel. If they do something else, you should do the same thing. You should be sure you crush them at it. So interesting. All right, let's look at, where's my strategy presentation? All right, can you see the strategy PowerPoint or not? Or how about the mission statement slide? You see this?
We're on controlling.
We're on controlling. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let me drop out. Okay, here we go. Your screen is paused. Share. All right, let me jump out of this and then jump back in. Okay. We are going to, I have a few too many of these open. All right, we'll go with control. That's what's open. We'll go, organization controls open, we'll go to that. We'll come back to strategy. This is the fourth topic I was going to talk about tonight. So basically, this is where managers monitor and regulate efficiently and how effectively and efficiently things are getting done, how the organization's working, how the members are doing. And we talked about the difference between efficient and effective, right? Efficient is most bang for the buck, doing the best you can with limited resources, and effective is doing the right things, right? It's amazing how many times organizations will work hard with lofty goals in mind on the wrong things, right? They're just spending their precious resources on the wrong things, and it doesn't get them anywhere. So so between the world of efficient and effective, which one is more important? I think it's more important to work effectively than efficiently, because you got to make sure you're working on the right things, the critical few things that really matter and are going to determine your success. Okay. Things we think about in organizational control, it turns out setting standards is a very common one, very useful one. Establish a standard of performance or a goal, measure the actual performance, compare the two together, and then evaluate the results. So many of us I know have been to meetings where goals were set, and then they go back and check on people how you did according to those goals, and that's a pretty good way to drive behavior in an organization. And that's how management sets up control. This is how we get you to do what we want you to do, and we're going to measure how you're doing. In the idea of control theory, it's kind of divided down to three categories. I'll kind of go through these. The output control, many of you are familiar with. These are numbers, right? We're going to have financial measures of performance, operating budgets, organizational goals, ship so many units by Friday, that kind of thing. Have a certain amount of cost savings, and basically if it's got a number associated with it, it's much more likely to be an output control. The problem I have with those they're all after the fact, right? You're measuring what has already happened. You're not controlling how those things are happening. Other than the standpoint, if I take measurements along the way, I can monitor progress and maybe make adjustments accordingly. But basically, by the time you look at financial measures, it's over, and it's what you really want to know is how to affect next year, not last year, right? It's hard to drive by looking in the rearview mirror. I like to tell the accounting people. Behavior control, this is not with numbers. This has to do with how do you control the behaviors of the employees, like direct supervision, setting goals, and management by objective reviews, those type things. And we'll talk about management by objectives in a little bit here. And then the last one is organizational, cultural, or clan control. That's like the norms, the values that workers have, the socializations, right? Many nurses tend to have a certain culture with the way they work, not just where they work, but just because they're a nurse. Many doctors do. I think it might be different for different jobs. So that's the things that people sort of get from each other in the workforce. Here we do this, we don't do that kind of thing. I think of that as elementary school teachers in public schools, right? No matter how I'm abused and poorly treated and low paid, right? I'm gonna do a good job because it's important I do a good job. We don't need to talk about that. If you ever think about what's a good goal, if you think about somebody sets a goal and it doesn't sound like a very good goal, we teach this little acronym of SMART that a goal should be very specific. It should be measurable. If somebody sets a goal and it's not measurable, then how are you going to know if you're doing the right things to make things better? How are you going to know you didn't make it worse, right? You go all the way back to like Deming, one of the quality gurus for Japan in the 60s and 70s, right? He talked about if you can't measure a change, don't bother making the change because you can't tell if it's doing any good or not, right? So if you're going to try to do something, that you need to figure out a way to measure it so if you know if it's getting any better, right? A goal needs to be obtainable, right? If I give you a goal to go run a 4-minute mile and you don't have a snowball's chance to make that, achieving that 4-minute mile, then you're not going to try, right? So goals should be within reach. If they're too far out of reach, people are just not going to try. Goals should be relevant, which means they should be important. I should think they're important if I need to do this. So if you're telling me I need to lose weight for my health, then I should know why, or I should lose weight. That's fine. And you should lose weight. Has to be measurable. How amount of weight should I be losing? Exactly why. But if it's going to be relevant, you should tell me why I should lose weight. It's not, maybe it's to look better, maybe, or more likely it's health reasons, right? And like, well, if you don't get you're going to need a double pie pass if you don't lose weight, then it's instantly relevant to me. And timely. We should set a time around everything. Not you should lose 20 pounds, but you lose 20 pounds by next St. Patrick's Day in March or something like that, right? You should set a time around things, otherwise it doesn't matter. Right? So if you get somebody all these at first 4 and say, hey, I want you to improve workers' morale by basis of the survey we give them by 15%, blah, blah, blah. I'll take any goal in the world as long as it doesn't have a time associated with it, because I can say I didn't fail, I'm just not finished yet, right? So you need to think long and hard about what kind of time domain you're going to put around organizational goals, right? So it's amazing how many poorly vague goals are out there. Things like we need to do better. I worked for a company that said one time we want to be number one. And I said, number one, what? They said, number one in our industry. And I said, all right, number one in size, number one in quality, number one in return on investment. What do we want to be number one at? And the answer I got was go see your boss. Right? So you need to the more specific you can be about goals and keep these things in mind, the more liable you are to see better results of people working towards them. And in terms of organization goal-wide setting, often this is the trickle-down effect, right? We usually set the top-level goals at the corporate level. If you think of a big major corporation, the corporate office will set top-level goals, right? And then for each individual division, they tell the divisions what they should be doing. Then the division managers will set goals for each function, each department in there. Then the functional managers will set goals for the worker bees, right? So we typically have a top-down driven goals. And when you think about it, that's the only way you're going to get everybody working on the same type of strategy, the same type of plan. Operating budgets are part of the goals. I'm going to skip through that. Problem with output controls, I mentioned, these are the ones that deal with just numbers. Managers must create output standards that motivate at all levels. And sometimes we can motivate people to operate in inappropriate behaviors, right? Some of the financial scandals of 2007, 2008 were blamed on people being monitored too rigorously on their output, so they cut a lot of corners. I don't really buy into that, but that was some of the blame associated with that. Let's talk about management by objectives just a little bit. Some of you work for smaller organizations and might not have seen this. This is a very common one in large organizations, also common in government offices. And basically, it's a goal-setting process which managers and subordinates negotiate specific goals and objectives for the subordinate to achieve, and then evaluate the attainment of those goals. So I could run through the steps here in that specific goals are established at each level of the organization. So if I'm a worker bee in my department, I'm an individual contributor, I should find out what the organizational goals are for the department. And then I, the employee, should list and prioritize my goals for the year, or however long we say, almost always a year. How many goals should I have for the year? Generally, the idea is 3 to 5. Most people I see will put down 4 or 5. It doesn't do me any good having 20 goals because I'll just become flustered and I won't get to them. Much better to have 3 or 5 main goals for the year. Right. Then I set what I think are my goals and I prioritize them. This is goal number 1. This is goal number 2. This is goal number 3. I work on goal number 1, priority number 1 first. When I can't work on that anymore because, I don't know, I'm waiting for something else, then I work on priority number 2 and so forth, right? I take them in priority. So the employee lists and prioritizes the goals, and then the manager reviews and edits the goals. So this is a meeting of the minds. This is very useful in the fact that the manager gets to see what the employee thinks their goals are. And if they're wildly different than what the manager thinks their goals are, then we better go get a cup of coffee and have a long talk about what you think and what I think and get all on the same page of the playbook. So after the employee lists their goals and prioritizes them, then the manager reviews and edits if required. So maybe the manager wants to change one, delete one, add one, change the priority, switch 2 and 3 around in priority, whatever happens, right? But the whole idea is the two come to an agreement at the end of that conversation, right? And then step 3, the managers and the subordinates sit down and periodically review the progress towards meeting those goals. Usually, if it happens at all, once a quarter at best. A lot of managers have good intentions. They just don't find the time in their day to sit down with their employees once a month or more than that. So typically, if you get to sit down and talk with your boss once a quarter about your goals, you're doing all right. As an employee, I would always like to send my boss progress reports, if not weekly, then monthly, so I can list out all the things I've been doing and working on. So if I am working on the wrong stuff, I can get some corrective action. But much more useful, I would document my progress. So at the end of the year, I would have these monthly statements, and I could roll them all together into my report on how I've done for the year. What I always tell the students, one of your 5 goals should be for your professional development. So if you've had conversations with your boss, like, what do I need to do to improve me so I can get promoted? And your boss tells you, well, you need to do more of this, more of that. Maybe you need to become more, I don't know, have more customer interaction, right? Then I should put that on one of my 5 goals. Usually the 5th one would be get more customer action during the next 12 months. And then if my boss signs off on that, they're saying they agree I need that, then I can kind of use that as a little bit of leverage to talk to the manager and say, hey, we agreed I needed more customer reaction. How about I go see these customers about this deal? And then at the end of the year, the employee number 5 here will write down how they have achieved those goals, and the manager will review and comment on those too. Yeah, I agree they did a great job. They got them finished early, all of that kind of stuff. But when we think about SMART goals, these objectives should be measurable, right? You know, I'm going to increase my customer reaction by 20%, or by do a cost savings, or whatever they should be. So you should clearly set objective goals down here for the employee, even if it's things like attend training seminars, that type of thing. So I kind of want to go through this a little bit because they are very common now in the workforce. Some people kind of have overdone it, but I think they're going to be with us for a while, particularly in the large companies. It's just a good way to track what everybody's up to, give everybody their marching orders, what we think they should be up to, and then talk about it later. At this point, I usually get a question that says, hey, what happens if your goal objectives change for the year? And the answer is that happens a lot, right? Then you would redo the form, sit down, talk to your boss, and get the new 5 objectives listed down and keep track of those, right? Because certainly things can change a lot in 12 months. Anybody have any comments? Anybody work place where you did management by objectives, MBOs, and good comments, bad comments, liked it, hated it? Any inputs on those? No. All right.
I have this, and I think it's very unique. It also differs by department, right? So depending upon what your role is within the organization, for instance, like on a production type, in my role, my goals are a lot different, and it's really more of an HR grading. So how do you impact culture? How do you impact the business? How do you impact the people around you? Whereas within operations, it might be how do you meet your deadlines, your NPS score, net promoter scores, how do you interact with customers, how do you deliver and timelines. Right. So in my role, I don't see this as effective. It really is just a task, but I do think in different roles, it is very effective, especially in like processing roles or growth within the organization of people that want a career plan or they want to figure out their next steps. It's more about the manager understanding, like, okay, you do have future goals, and how can I help you get there? Yes. Yeah.
And I always like that it sort of helps point out to the employee you're in charge of your own career, right? And what you need to do you need to have conversation with people, what you need to do to get yourself ready for that next step, whatever that might be. But I agree, Timmy, that some jobs are difficult to put down with specific objectives for the year. That's for sure. Or if you do have those objectives, difficult to measure. Organizational control and change, right? This is the yin and yang, right? We see this need to improve operations, so people are constantly pushing for organizational change, but you also have a lot of people not wanting organizational change because we're busy with current events, we have to do new things, and managers tend to balance those two. But when we talk about organizational change next week, we'll talk about some of the organizational inertia you have to overcome and how difficult that can be. Benchmarking is a term that still gets thrown around quite a bit. and certainly would apply in the medical industry, in that benchmarking is a process of one company or one organization comparing performance from a specific dimension with a high-performing organization. So we're going to go watch somebody do something and take notes on how they do it and see if we can learn from it. They don't have to be a competitor. They can be somebody who does something similar to us, and we're going to extrapolate what we can do for takeaways from that. So for instance, in the 90s, when I was making cell phones for Ericsson here in Lynchburg, we bought robots from Sony. So we asked Sony, so that was the days of the Sony Handycam. Remember the long, skinny video camera with the flip, and then later they'd flip out DVD or LCDs on them in the 90s. So Sony was dominating the market with their Handycams. So we asked Sony, said, hey, when we come over to Japan to buy some robots, can we go see the video camera plant? Because a video camera is a plastic housing with a battery and electronic boards inside, and a cell phone is a plastic housing with a battery and electronic boards inside. So we even though they're in a completely different market and not a competitor, we wanted to go see how they did it. And that was a very interesting tour. So that's the idea of benchmarking. Oh, by the way, the most famous benchmarking, the one I can think of, is Southwest Air, the airlines, right? They pride themselves on turning around airplanes in 30 minutes. Right, from time an airplane docks to the time it undocks, so they can get through it in 30 minutes. So they had a contest inside their organization, and they sent their ground crew, some of them representatives, to NASCAR pit crew training camp. Right, NASCAR pit crews turn a car around in like 14 seconds to get it back out on the track. So, and whether it's clearly not the same thing as a 727, but they sent people to camp so they would learn how to turn a vehicle around quickly, and then they could apply that to the jets. Because there's cross training, there's backup tools, there's things you can do to sort of keep it in the same idea.
All right. I just was trying to get this to work.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I was thinking, I found it in the attic, and we're trying to.
Yeah. I haven't seen anybody walking around public with one of those in a while. Actually, no, I have seen some international tours do it when we were at Niagara Falls, but I haven't seen anybody else do it in a while. All the kids certainly use their phones. But that was an interesting tour. Oh, by the way, we got the boot. The video camera plant manager couldn't stand the fact that we were there. The robot guys talked to him twice, and then suddenly something happened, and we had to go sit in a room for 20 minutes. And next thing you know, our bus pulls up, and it's time to go. So we basically got we as polite as they could gave us the boot, because they realized they had people there who knew what they were seeing and could figure out what was up, and they didn't want that. They didn't want the cat out of the bag. Not that they were doing that spectacular different than anybody else, but they were just not inclined to share, which that's fine. Okay.
We do, so Lee, we do benchmarking as an agency for our prospects and clients to know how their benefits stack up against other companies in their area, in their industry, on a number of different levels.
Good.
So I think it's Kaiser Foundation.
Okay. All right. Good. That's really useful to know. There you have to be careful. People don't cherry pick data, right? We need the whole picture, not part of the picture.
Right.
Yeah. Just because they're ahead of us here doesn't mean they're ahead of us there or whatever.
Right.
All right. I think that's as far as I wanted to go. What's on 14? Yeah, that was just a review slide. Okay. Okay, screen sharing has stopped. Let me open screen sharing one more time. See if we can get the strategy. Okay. Can you see the strategy slide now?
Not yet.
New share.
It doesn't really like having new windows.
It doesn't it? Right.
No, you usually have to open it and then share your screen.
Yeah, I think you're right. How's that? You got it? Strategy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right, we'll bounce ahead a little bit. So SWOT analysis, many of you are familiar with that. I just wanted to make sure everybody understands. So SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. The idea is strengths and weaknesses are internal, right? What are we strong with, and what are we strong with, and what are our weaknesses? So if you're if you're Nike, I was just talking about Nike, right? You have strong skills in marketing and apparel design. A weakness might be I don't know what you put down for a weakness from Nike. Internal weaknesses. They don't have a lot of explorational expertise because they hire people to build all their stuff for them. Might be a weakness, right? Opportunities and threats. Globalization could be an opportunity more and more for Nike. They could get deeper in the Chinese market and the Indian market and so forth. And a threat might be, I guess, a trade war with China, right? If they're selling more and more in China, a trade war, right? So opportunities and threats are external, strengths and weaknesses are internal. And sometimes the same thing is both an opportunity and a threat, right? Like globalization or international trade, those types of things. Some organizations have a low-cost strategy where the whole idea is to drive down costs so we can be this low-cost provider. Everybody else, right, operates on differentiation. How are we different than everybody else? Right. So whether it's in product design, quality, after-sales service, it doesn't have to be just the quality or the product we sell. It can be lots of different things like the sales force that helps you, the knowledgeable sales force that helps you pick what's right for you. Could be lots and lots of things. Maybe we have better parking, right? So there's lots of things that differentiate different suppliers from another. I always tell the students my local dry cleaner here in Forest is the only dry cleaner I go to because I hate spelling my last name for the high schoolers working at a dry cleaner. And you can imagine what that's like. And they don't get it, and they run out of room. And then I hear comments like, wow, I bet that was hard to learn how to spell and all that kind of stuff. Well, our local dry cleaner gave us a dry cleaning bag, and on there is a tag with my name and phone number on it, right? So I go to the window, I hand them the bag, they take the bag, and they say, Wednesday okay? And I say, Wednesday would be great. And then I leave, and I come back on Wednesday, and they have my dry cleaning. I don't have to spell my name 4 times every time I go. So that little bag differentiates them from every other dry cleaner in the world, and that's where I go just because of that. Now, it's on the way and all that, but so are about, between my house and University of Lynchburg, there's probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 dry cleaners, but that's the one I always go to because of that. So the point is, it doesn't take a lot to differentiate yourself. Just one little thing, if it's the right thing, could be enough. The idea is don't try to do both. That's deadly, right? You try to be the low-cost producer and have special services and all that, right? Generally, you try to be all things to all people, and you're nothing to nobody at that point. So that's a dangerous spot to try. And why is there a special warning against that? Because so many people have tried it. 5 forces model is probably one you haven't been familiar with if you're haven't taken a strategy class before. So there's a guy named Michael Porter at Harvard. He writes a lot of strategy books, and he talks about how to implement strategy and things we should look for. And the 5 forces model talks about the forces pushing on an organization from the outside. And it's sort of like the steep thing we looked at with the environment, all that, but this has basically to do with current and future competitors. So some of the things that affect the competitive, this is all about competitive forces. So things that affect the competitive forces. So level of rivalry, increase for competition lowers lower results. So if you're General Electric and you're the only one making MRI machines other than Siemens, right, the level of rivalry is low, right? So you could get away with things you couldn't get away with if you're making commodity type products like, I don't know, you're a gas station and people buy the same gas, mostly the same gas anywhere, so the competition's much higher. The level of rivalry is much higher. Potential for entry. Easy entry leads to lower prices and profits. So if I've got a business that's easy for other people to jump into, I'm going to end up with more competition. If I'm, again, GE Medical Systems making MRI machines, those are very expensive, very complicated. They take a high combination of technology and capital just to develop an MRI machine. Not many people are going to do that. That's why there's only 2 main players in the world. Am I right on that, by the way? Does anybody else make MRI machines? Anybody know? Right. Far as I know, it's Siemens and General Electric, right? If you don't know Siemens, they're sort of the General Electric of Europe, right? They make a lot of big high-tech things, including medical supplies. All right, so power of suppliers. Sometimes the students ask me, well, how can a supplier have power? You're buying from them. You can always say no. Well, if there are only a few suppliers of important items, they might be able to charge what they want. So for instance, Intel gets to charge pretty much a premium price because they're the only ones who make the kind of processors they make, right? So yeah, suppliers can have power, and certainly this is the idea of the pharmaceutical companies, right? And they want to make sure there's fewer suppliers so they have more power. So when I hear them complaining about there's all the legislation that makes our pharmaceuticals so expensive, what they really mean is, in my take on it, and I know one of the economics professors I teach with, his take is, no. What we've done is put a lot of barriers to entry up, so it makes it difficult for people to enter. Therefore, I'm going to charge a lot more because there's less competition, right? And the fact that it's a long time to get drug approval and all that, again, it's their advantage. So when someone sees they have a winning product, it takes them years to catch up because there's all these government hurdles in the way, FDA hurdles in the way, right? So that's an idea of the power of suppliers, and certainly the pharmaceutical industry is an excellent example of that. We heard a lot about that last night. Power of customers. So absolutely, the customers can have a lot of power, particularly when there's only a few large customers. Right? If you're selling to lots of things to a lot of people, if you have lots of customers, you can afford to, if somebody wants too low a price or they're too big of a pain to deal with, bad credit, whatever, you just say, no, we don't need your business, go on. You have plenty of other customers. But if there's only a few customers, then you really got to talk to them, and they know there's a few of them, and they're going to bargain hard for prices. So, for instance, when I sold cell phones, we didn't sell them to people like you. We sold them to Verizon and AT&T and places like that. And there are usually only a few people at a time bidding on the phone, so they would be pretty aggressive on there, trying to get us to lower prices. And the last thing is more of a marketing term. It's substitute products. So what are available as substitutes to the product you have? And certainly in the pharmaceutical world, you have generics, but you have alternative drugs too, right? And in the world of like marketing, we usually talk about, are you going to go to the movies or are you going to stay at home and watch Netflix would be a substitute. So a substitute isn't a competitor. It's something else you could spend those same dollars on. All right. Any thoughts, questions, comments about that? So there's whole books written on this. This is Michael Porter's 5 Forces model, and it's looked at a pretty good description of the competitive forces. This is not everything you need to know for strategy. You need to know how the global environment's going to change. You need to know how the economy is going to change. You need to know how the demographics of your markets are going to change. This just has to deal with just the competitive of current and future rivals in the business, including your suppliers and your customers, and how much control you can have for them or how much they can have of you. Vertical integration, you may have heard that in the medical industry. Vertical integration is where a company will absorb either its supply chain or its sale or its distribution channels. Actually, I have a chart. So a vertical chain would be we're doing assembly, but we're also going to do intermediate manufacturing and buying the raw materials right from the ground, build them together, and do our own distribution, send it to the customer. So if I'm an assembly house here, if I go this way and buy my distributor, that's forward vertical integration. If I go backwards in the food chain or backwards in the supply chain, that's backward vertical integration. Most companies are doing less of this, Samsung being the big exception. They're much more into buying up their sources of raw materials and so forth. Apple is doing less and less of the vertical chain, and Samsung's doing the opposite. They're grabbing up all their suppliers and all of that. So interesting to see how that one works out in the long run. Diversification, right? A lot of big corporations diversify. I used to work for General Electric, so General Electric makes not just medical systems, they make electric locomotives for the trains, they make airplane engines, they make defense equipment, sonars, missiles, those type things. So General Electric motors, refrigerator, major appliances, of course, they no longer make the small appliances, but major appliances. So General Electric ends up, companies like that do a lot of things, they in a lot of markets, so they spread out the risk is the idea. But they like to be in the markets where they can leverage their strengths. So many years ago when GE looked at getting into a new market, they didn't have medical systems yet. The reason GE makes medical systems is the story I heard when I worked at GE was their strategy. People were looking at what can we do? What's new markets we can get into? Electric motors has been a great market, but that seems to be topping off as manufacturing slows down. Trains aren't growing more, so we can't sell that many electric locomotives in China. Power generation equipment is good, but that's slowing down too, except for China. So what can we get into? And they thought, well, what are our strengths? GE is known for a couple things. One, they have a lot of money to bank. So we have capital resources. We have big money. So we should invest in something that takes big money to come up with so there's fewer competitors. And we have a lot of technology. We have a lot of engineers and a lot of experience with high-tech manufacturing. So we should figure out what costs a lot of money, is high-tech, and people are willing to pay a lot of money for. Answer? Medical systems, medical equipment, right? So that's why GE is in the medical business. In that division, I haven't looked lately, but at one point, that one division had enough revenue to be in the top 100 corporations in the US, right? That's how big it is. So that was a booming success for them. All right, so that's diversification. So we can have two kinds of diversification, related and unrelated, right? So related would be like GE constantly getting into high-tech products that cost a lot of money. Unrelated to be, I'm going to, I don't know. I guess GE got into banking too, but you would think of companies that got into very much different businesses, and that's to spread the risk down. So if one part of the economy goes down, they might not feel the pain much because they have different divisions in different parts of different industries. I can review these terms real quickly for you, just sort of a management review here. 4 ways of companies expand internationally. Importing, exporting, I think we all got a handle on that. Where exporting is making stuff here, shipping it there. Licensing and franchising. Licensing, the difference between those two is licensing is somebody pays me for the right to make something that I own and then sell it on their own risk. So if I'm a sports team, right, I make you pay to use my logo and put it on t-shirts, right? That's licensing. Franchising is McDonald's, right? So you're deeper into the mix now. You actually own the restaurant, but you have to run it our way. So in terms of franchising and licensing, generally we have more control in franchising because we make them follow our operational design to do it exactly like we want them to do it. By the way, if anybody hasn't seen that movie on Netflix with the beginning of McDonald's about Ray Kroc, anybody see it? What was the name of that movie? Anybody see it? It comes off the top of their head.
The Founder?
The Founder. There you go. Did you like it?
Loved it.
Yeah. It's really fascinating to watch how the Kroc brothers figured out how to make hamburgers and French fries and take orders very efficiently. And they practiced. They had it laid out with tape on a tennis court when they laid out their restaurant and all. It's very good. Ray Kroc doesn't come out of it real well at the end, does he? No. It's a good movie though. Yeah, it's called The Founder. It's on Netflix. I assume it's still on. It's a good movie. For an operations guy like me, I thought it was a great movie. Strategic alliance, that's where we agree to work together. But we're still separate companies, but we legally work together. So for instance, when flat screen TVs got on or caught on big, there was a big scramble, and the thinner and the more the thinner and the flatter the glass is, the better the picture. So Corning Incorporated in New York was making really good glass for the LCD for the flat screen TVs. They're also the ones who make Gorilla Glass. They got in a deal with Samsung. So Samsung said we want to buy X millions of dollars of glass, and Corning said we can't produce that much. We have to build a whole new $2 billion factory. And they said, well, oh yeah, we want you to do that. And they're like, well, we're not building a $2 billion factory just because you say you're going to buy some glass from us. So they said, all right. So they got a strategic alliance where they had a signed agreement, and if you build this factory, we'll buy X acres of glass, and the rest is history. So that's how Samsung got a big leg up in the flat screen market. So that's strategic alliance. A joint venture is different. There's a legal combining of usually parts of the company. So for instance, I used to make cell phones for the Swedish company Ericsson in the 90s. And at the end of the 90s, we were losing a lot of market share to Nokia, Motorola, and a few others. Sony, who we bought the robots from, also made cell phones, but they only sold them in Japan. They tried to sell robots in the They tried to sell phones in the U.S. They didn't work very good. So the Ericsson phones worked well. They weren't very user friendly. It's kind of like using a graphing calculator. They had lots of buttons, but they were kind of confusing. Sony had easy to use phones. They just didn't make a call. They just didn't make a call very well, right? They didn't operate as a phone very well. So Sony took their cell phone division, and Ericsson took their cell phone division, and they combined them in a joint venture. So it was called Sony Ericsson Phones. And they did this through about 15 years. They made phones in that division for the U.S. market. Sony, Sony's the parent company, owned half of the joint venture, and Ericsson owned the other half of the joint venture. And then any money the cell phone venture makes, half goes to Ericsson, half goes to Sony, right? So it is a separate third legal entity. You still have Sony, you still have Ericsson, but down here is Sony Ericsson owned 50% by one, 50% by the other, right? That's not the way they always go, but generally that's the case. Wholly owned foreign subsidiary is where a company goes it alone, and they will start a company up in a different country, and usually they incorporate in that country. So if you go to places like, last time I was in Germany, you go by buildings that say IBM Germany on them, right? That's a separate corporation wholly owned by IBM in the US, right? And you do that because it's yours. You have 100% control and you have 100% of the risk, but you get 100% of the reward. So you really got to be pretty confident you know what you're doing. But that's what we mean by wholly owned subsidiary. I'm going to start a different business, set up as a separate legal entity, but I'm going to own all of it. That's because it's wholly owned, right? And then again, that's maximum risk. That's maximum risk, maximum reward when you do that. Okay. So that's kind of it for strategy. I wanted to talk about then organizational structure, right? This is the last one. So I'm going to resume share. All right, do you see designing organizational structure? No? All right, try it again. New share. Oh, here we go. All right, now you got it?
Yes.
Okay, so next class we're going to talk about organizational change a lot. So tonight we're going to finish up talking about different organizational designs, right, and what they're supposed to do for us. All right, and we mean organizational structure, we mean this, right, kind of the org chart, right, the formal system of reporting relationships between people. Right, and organizational design is the process we go through to come up with that. So factors we need to think about affecting organizational structure: the organizational environment that we're operating in, what's our overall strategy, do we want to be spread out, do we want to be pulled together, what are the technology factors affecting how we work, and our human resources, right? So it's a lot of things to think about when you're designing an organizational structure. We'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. Drill down through that a little bit. We have job design, and the idea is we got to decide how to divide tasks onto specific jobs, and sometimes there's a push for job simplification to make reducing the number of tasks for each worker to perform. Often that happens where we have a workforce where the turnover is high because we want to be able to train them very quickly. I'm thinking of on a Little Caesars pizza, right? Where they can train a new worker in about 30 minutes to work at Little Caesars. The joke is it's kind of like McDonald's, right? Designed by geniuses to run by, well, not geniuses, right? So they know they pay them little, and that's it. That's the plan. That's an organized plan. They're going to pay them little. They know the turnover is going to be high, so we're going to have very simple instructions, all documented well, so our workers can train each other very quickly because there are going to be new faces there all the time. So that's job simplification. The opposite of that is job enlargement, where we give them more tasks to do, not fewer. Right? We do that so they don't get so bored. They're given different tasks to do, and so they get to move around, that type of thing. And that's different from job enrichment. In job enrichment, we're giving them a higher degree of responsibility they have. So rather than if in terms of like a chef, job enlargement would be you're going to cook more dishes, right? You're going to learn how to cook more different things. Job enrichment is you're going to do the planning for the groceries, the getting the supplies, designing the menu, that kind of thing. You're going to do tasks you haven't done before. So job enlargement is more of the same. Job enrichment is higher level tasks, including things like planning, scheduling yourself, things like that. The job characteristics model, this is a good one to kind of keep handy if you're ever going to design a job for a new employee. Things that lead to higher motivation, higher performance, higher satisfaction are over here: skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. And we'll look at those. I think I have definitions for those real quickly. Yeah. So skill varieties, employees use a wide range of skills, right? That one's kind of obvious. So people, they like to be able to use more of their skills. Task identity, workers involved in all the tasks of a job from beginning to end of a production process or of a process. So this is the opposite. This would be the worker who installs a door handle on the passenger side of a F-150 pickup, and that's all they know how to do. That's all they ever see. They never see the truck itself, that kind of thing. That's the opposite of task identity. A good task identity would be somebody comes into a ward, right, pretty bad shape, and the nurses are taking care of them, and the nurses get to see him get better and leave, right? They get to see him come in, they get to see him improve, then they get to see him leave in good shape, right? That would be good task identity. Task significance is workers feel the task is meaningful, and this says to the organization. I would venture to say it doesn't have to be the organization. It's just significantly, it's a job that's significant, period, right? So the person who hangs stoplights on the highway, right, they would think of their job as significant because if those stoplights don't work right, there's going to be chaos and possibly some people are going to get seriously hurt. So they have to do it right because their job has significance. Even if they don't get treated well by the organization or paid well and all that, their job has significance. It always impresses me how people are pretty resilient, how people can find that significance thing in their job. You might not ever think of it, but to them, right, they have an important job to do because of this, this, and this. So people are pretty good at finding why their job is important and the significance of it. Autonomy, employees have a freedom to schedule tasks and carry them out. So what order we're going to do things, are you going to do that today or tomorrow? I get to decide. That tends to add to the morale of the employees. Not everybody likes that. Some people don't like the stress of doing that. They just want to turn their brain off and be told what to do. And then feedback, workers get direct information about how well the job is done. Often organizations will do things like post metrics on the wall, how we did, how many defects we had, how many things we shipped, how many things went out of here defect free, that kind of thing. So we give the workers feedback, even though there's no pay related to it. Often that's enough, right? So we see feedback, knowledge, results of work leads to higher satisfaction, and that leads to higher job performance. When I was a lowly college kid, I worked in a TV tube factory one summer back when we had these things in the United States. It was a terrible job. I worked on an assembly line, did the exact same thing every 30 seconds. See these things over here, these 5 things? I didn't have any of those first 4, right? Absolutely nothing of those. But I did get some feedback in the fact that when I snapped these TV parts together, if they were bad ones, they got caught at the end of the assembly. Well, they got caught further down the line, and somebody was there putting a mark on. They could tell who did it, and somebody put a mark on there, and there was no good, there was no bad, there was no minimum number you were supposed to meet. It was just put on the wall, and I learned that it was down there about my 3rd night at work, and I used to walk by and check it every time thinking, hey, I'm college Joe kid here. I can do a better job than these people who are bored to death who've been working here a long time. And just for fun, I would try to beat their numbers, do a better job than they did. I was on 2nd shift and had to work till midnight just for fun. And just giving me that feedback was enough to make me try significantly harder at my job rather than without that, I really could have cared less of how they were going together. So often giving people just a little bit of feedback on how they're doing tends to have a positive effect on their results. Okay, so back to organizational structure, right? Many organizations use a functional structure, and you guys would know that as departments. Departments are organized by function. Accounting does accounting, HR does HR, legal does legal, and so forth, right? That's hands down the most common organizational structure out there. Advantages, right? Encourages everyone to work together. So the accountants all work together. They all sit together. They talk to each other, and they learn how to do accounting from each other. Particularly, it's a good training ground for the younger, less experienced workers. And it's easier for the manager to monitor, to evaluate the workers. And we probably have an accounting manager. The accounting manager is probably an accountant, so they know what's going on. They know what the workers are supposed to be doing and the details of their job, and that tends to be useful. A disadvantage, it's difficult for departments to communicate with each other. Often they're referred to as functional silos. They're silos because on the org chart, we show them as columns of people. And so people get preoccupied with their own department and they forget the big picture about the entire organization. Dilbert, the cartoon in the newspaper, has constant cartoons about this and about the engineers and the marketing not getting along. And of course, Dilbert's an engineer, so marketing gets everything and the engineers get treated poorly and so forth. Certainly that's an issue that needs to be watched out for the organization. And it's not uncommon to sit in meetings and hear one department disparage another department in a joking way. I mean, it's sort of sometimes it's a friendly competition, sometimes it's a less friendly competition. Often organizations, particularly big corporations, have divisions and organizational structure composed of separate business units, which are the functions that work together to produce a specific good. So I mentioned General Electric has a division building jet aircraft engines. They have another division building refrigerators, our large appliances, right? And those two get treated as separate companies. If they need to, they'll help each other, but they're through corporate, but they're generally treated as separate companies. Sometimes we divide not at the divisional level, but at the product structure. Each product line is a self-contained division. I would imagine that's the way it is at Apple. Each iPhone is its own division, its own entity. It's certainly iPods, iPads, all those would be separate. iTunes would be treated as separate advantages. For a product structure, you get really good at one product area. The bad part is that's all you know, right? So specialization has its own drawbacks. things get a little more complicated. So here's a product structure where we see here's washing, drying machines, a lighting division, and a television and stereo division, right? So this is almost General Electric right to the T in this chart. So this is a product structure. They've broken up the organization by products. Now you could call these, they call them product divisions here. So you could call that a divisional structure or a product structure. I'd probably call it a divisional structure. Sometimes they divide up by geographic divisions, especially sales forces, right? We'll have a northern region, western region, and so forth. Right? So it's not uncommon. We might see that. Sometimes divide it by market structure, who our customers are. So we have a certain group calls on large businesses, certain group calls on small businesses, certain group call on educational organizations, and so forth. That's not uncommon either. Particularly, I've seen this in like aerospace companies that deal with commercial aircraft and military aircraft. Those would be completely separate divisions because of who the customers are. We talked about geographic structure a little bit. Well, here's a global geographic structure where we're going to divide up the whole globe, and again, sometimes that's just the sales force, sometimes it's the entire company, and sometimes we have a hybrid. Let me back it up. Sometimes we'll have a hybrid structure where we'll mix it up. We'll have a global structure for the workforce, but everybody else is in divisions. That's not an uncommon way for companies to do it. And the last thing I really wanted to cover in this type of organizational structure was a matrix organization. This is very common in large companies. It's very common in tech companies. It's very common in government offices. I'm not so sure about the healthcare field. If you would see a matrix organization, I'll show you what it is. And you can give me some feedback. A matrix organization has this. We have a functional organization. We have departments: engineering, sales and marketing, product design, research and development, manufacturing. We could keep going, right? Accounting, legal, finance, whoever, right? And then on top of that, in addition to the functional departments, we have a product, or often they're called project teams. I'm used to them being called project teams, where we could put somebody from sales and marketing is on the project team. We have a couple people from product design on the product team. We have 4 people from research on the product team. So we put together a cross-functional team for a project, and we pull people temporarily out of the departments. So it's a matrix organization because we have the functional departments coming downward, and we have the projects going across the organization. That's why it's a matrix. And then those are typically, project assignments are temporary. They have a beginning and an end. It may be 3 days, it may be 3 years, but usually there's a beginning and an end. But your functional manager is considered your permanent manager. So that's your home. When the project is over, you go back to your home. And then we typically, we like these organizations because I get these cross-functional teams, but they still have some home support for their technology, and we can do complicated tasks with the cross-functional team. The downside of this organization is this person right here has 2 bosses. They work for their engineering manager, and they work for their product team A manager. And when you have 2 bosses, you got, as long as they agree, everything's fine. When they don't agree, it's not so fine. So that's one of the rules of management. Somebody should only have 1 boss. This clearly violates that, but it's useful. But it's useful because we get to have these cross-functional teams that do complex tasks. So you see this a lot out in the industry, right? So it's a matrix organization. We have functional departments, but then the people in the functional departments often get assigned to cross-functional project teams, and they work on those for a temporary basis, and they go back to their departments. So, and again, the big problem is when the 2 people disagree, and then there's trouble. All right, we talked about this. This is an example of, we can take people from different functional departments and put them in different locations. These are manufacturing units, but we can kind of do the reverse of a matrix, pull them out of here and have them work on sites to work on specific products. And then we can make a hybrid organization, which basically says we can do what we want because we think it's the best way to go. Earlier we talked about authority, the people to hold the people accountable for their actions. And authority comes from your place on the food chain, from the org chart. We talked about span of control, a number of reports that, it's just some vocabulary here. Span of control is the number of subordinates report directly to somebody. A line and a staff manager, we hear those terms a lot in the business literature. Not everybody's got a handle on that. A line manager is someone in the direct chain of command who has formal authority over people. A staff manager is someone responsible for managing a specialist function like legal, or this says finance or marketing, but marketing might be a staff might be a line job too. I think of line people as people who touch the product or the customers. Staff people are people who make the organization go, but they don't necessarily touch the product or the customers. So a staff organization would be HR or legal, right? HR is not that different from one company to the next, versus if you work in the manufacturing, that's definitely different from one company to the next. So if you're line and staff are the support organization that make the organization go, and line managers are the people who actually handling the product and the customers. Tall and flat organizations, they're actually just that. A flat organization has fewer layers, so we get to the top pretty quickly. And tall organizations have lots of layers of management to get through to the top. So why one and not the other? If I want quick response, I go with a flat organization. If I want lots of control, people watching people, and I want consistent decisions being made by people high up in the organization, then I go with a tall organization. The problem is this can become like a game of telephone where all the kids sit in a circle and you tell secret to somebody, then the next person, by the time he gets around the circle, it's hilarious because nobody knows what the comment was. The same thing can happen in a tall organization. When you pass information up the chain of command, it can be distorted, sometimes accidentally, sometimes on purpose. By the time it gets to the top people, it might be useless, or it's too late, or it's just unrecognizable or not understandable. So it's easy to have problems with this. But in a flat organization, we don't have very many people wandering while watching people's activities. So if some people are people are getting in trouble, they're doing the wrong things, they're making bad decisions, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. We don't have many people matching those or watching those people, and that could get us in trouble. You see organizations, which is better? It depends what you want. Do you want control or do you want speed? Right? Those two things are the things that go switch back and forth. And many organizations sort of waffle back and forth, in my opinion. They're not sure. The grass is always greener. Let's try that for a while. Let's try this for a while. I know when organizations try to do big cost savings, right, a lot of times they'll rip out. When they talk about middle management, they mean that. You're in the middle of the chain here. They take those managers out there because they'll have the 5s report directly to the 3s, or they'll have the 5s report directly to the 2s. They'll just take out the middle layers of management because they tend to be fairly well paid, and the thought is maybe we don't need them after all. We go to a flatter organization. So when you see companies forced to do big cost savings, that's sort of a tried and true approach. They'll go to that one pretty quickly. And that's what we mean by middle managers, right? They'll take those out. That can be tough, by the way, when you're in that spot. If you get pulled out of your job because you might have been in the organization for a long time, you're very specialized in your knowledge, and it might be difficult for you to find a job that pays similarly. You might be in for a big downsizing in paychecks if you get pulled out of an org like that. Okay. Any questions about organizational design? Right. So next week we're going to talk about how to change those organizations and what they're up to. Let me see. Planning and strategy.
And a real quick question on organizational design. Do you think ever in the future they'll have, say, more than one CEO run a company? Because a lot of CEOs, say, like I remember the one that made like toasters and that, they used to call him Chainsaw Al, and he would go in and just change everything, cut costs, and then trying to make them profitable. But then a lot of these CEOs make a lot of big mistakes, and a lot of companies say go out of business because of CEOs going in the wrong direction. So I think if you would have more than, say, one CEO, would it be better because they would say keep each other on the same path?
There was a company that tried that. Was it not Ben and Jerry's? Gosh, who did that? But nobody else emulated it, right? I agree. The problem, when you have a concentration of power, like a CEO can make a lot of decisions, right? They're the king, and what they say goes until the board of trustees stops them. So they have a lot of concentrated power, so they can make a lot of changes. And if they're positive changes, things get better quickly, hopefully, right? That's always the goal. That's the dream, right? But if they take you down the wrong path, they take you down long and hard, and things can be disastrous, right? And I've certainly seen that happen too. So And so you wonder, like, I understand when Chrysler went almost out of business, they gave all that power to Lee Iacocca in the 80s to make all these changes, and he did, and he saved Chrysler, and he saved lots of jobs for lots of decades, and it worked out well. Like you said, with Chainsaw Al, not so much, right? He went in and did a lot of slash and burn, and things didn't go so well in a number of places. So it would seem like the desperate organizations might try it more than the non-desperate organizations. The problem is if you're kind of fat and happy and you don't want to make a lot of changes, then you're probably going to get a CEO who doesn't make a lot of changes anyway. So you're not taking a lot of risk. And so they kind of think it'd be cheaper to go along with one. So I guess the bottom line is, I think about it, I really doubt if you're going to see a team of organizations do that. You'll see it in Europe first, right? Where they like to have consensus building for decisions, right? Americans are much more oriented to action decisions. Let's make the call. Let's go. If my boss said do this, here we go. And then it is what it is after that. So I think if it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen more the UN style of management happening out of European companies, and then we'll have to see what happens in the long run in the U.S. But in the U.S., I can't imagine there's going to be much of that to answer it. It would be nice, though, if the Board of Trustees, I think, were more active in checking what the CEOs were doing and keep them from going down the path. So sometimes the students will ask me, particularly a number of years ago, whose fault was it the big housing mortgage blow up in 2008 and the stock market went to half and all that? Who I thought was at fault? Was it the lenders or the buyers, right? And my answer is, I think it's the Board of Trustees, right? These CEOs and higher level executives, they were encouraged by the Board of Trustees to take bigger and bigger chances, to do riskier and riskier loans, to make more and more profits. And that works until it doesn't, and then it led to disaster for not just some of those banks, but a lot of people and a lot of small people, and the stock market went down to half and all that. So it comes to the top level management, the Board of Trustees. But I get, while if it's working for other companies, you want to try it. If they're making much more money than they used to, but they're taking risk, but it's paying off and they're making money for 2, 3, 4 years in a row, I get why banks were tempted to say, you know what, let's go ahead and do what they're doing, because we thought we were right in that it was too risky, but apparently it isn't. They're making billions of dollars through a number of years. Let's go jump on the bandwagon and try it, right? And they probably got there just in time for it to blow up in their face. So I think I would like to see more active management of trustees, right? The Board of Trustees pick the CEO, they hire the CEO and fire the CEO, but I don't see a lot of effort to move the dial at all. I see us keep going just like we are for a long period of time, which is not the best model you might want to see. By the way, I teach in Europe sometimes. Many European companies, even if they're 200, 300, 400, the decent size, 200, 300, 400 employees, they're family owned, it's very much different, their decision-making style. If I'm an American manager who has quarterly goals, annual goals, I got to show improvement. They gave me this job, they made me the CEO, or I work for the new CEO who knows he gets a bonus, he improves things, his whole career is staked on his improvements as his first year as CEO. He's going to do whatever it takes, and if I help him look good, I'll get rewards for that. If I don't help him look good, there'll be consequences. So the U.S. tends to have a very short-term approach to upper management and how the company's going to do. In Europe, I might work at a family that my great-grandfather started my company. My grandfather runs it. I'm a young guy. My dad works there. My cousins work there. When the whole goal is not to make the quarterly numbers, the goal is for the business to survive, to hand it down to the next generation. And the workers, so many of the workers have been there a long time, and maybe their kids work there, so their goals are the same. So they are very different companies to do business with, because they're all about long-term survival. So they want to make sure they are in long-term markets, but they also are kind of bigger on customer satisfaction, because they don't care if they have to spend a little more money now. They'd rather have a satisfied customer, so they'll keep their name and reputation in the long run. That's how they get away with being more expensive, is because they're known for their customer service, because they won't leave you in a lurch. They won't stick to the letter of the contract and so forth. I mean, they might, but typically they're less likely to do it, more likely to help you out than the American corporation. So I kind of, as you can tell, I kind of like that economic model, although it's hard to magically come up with family-owned businesses out of nowhere. But I think they have a good future, and I've done business with them, and I think, like I said, that you might pay a little more, but there's less chance of disaster. I feel a lot safer dealing with them, because they're not going to leave you in a lurch, because they don't want that. They don't want their name smeared. So they want you to be successful too as their customer. So I like that approach. All right, that's kind of a long answer to not so long question. Any other questions, comments about organizations, organizational designs? how things are, where you think things are going? Right.
Just real quick, Allstate's going through because they have the tall organizational design now.
Yeah.
And the competition
is it Allstate you said?
Doesn't. Yes. Yeah. So like Geico and those don't have such so we're in our operating expenses say 28%. The way they look at it, and we need to say get to more where Geico is, so they're trying to get to like 23%. So they're cutting real estate, moving moving from Chicago into less expensive cities, for real estate, and eliminating jobs. So
don't be a middle manager, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
That's where they go looking. Oh, you make $140,000 a year? Come here, I want to talk to you. Yeah. That's where they're going to go. I'll bet you. That's typically the way it goes, right? And again, you're saving money, and that works good as you get driving fewer and fewer people out of the chain of command until you don't have enough control, right? And then people, things go awry, right? And people start going off on their own, doing whatever. So it takes a lot of extra communication to make both of those things successful. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your assessment of the European model and the American model is very interesting to me because what you sounded like you were describing to me is, I think there's two corporate worlds in America, maybe more.
Okay.
But the really large corporations are the American model that you described.
Yes.
And smaller corporations, which is where I've played the consulting role and the CFO role. And whenever I've been a CFO, it's always been in the organization that's small enough that they need me, but it's not. I've never done a $100 million a year company. It's more like $40-50 million a year companies.
Uh-huh.
And they tend to be small enough that they can be responsive. They make ethical decisions. They're in it for the long run. They're either trying to develop the business so that it can provide value to the employees and the community, or they're trying to pass it on to the next generation, whether it's actually family or not.
Okay.
But they don't have the ethical dilemmas that these large corporations do. And to bring it back to the healthcare world, from my perspective, when I'm dealing with the Capital Blues and the Highmarks, I feel like I'm dealing with the large corporate model that you were describing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of separation of ethics. People are removed from doing the right thing. They do the corporate thing. They say corporate words. They execute as if they're almost brainwashed. But when you're working in a small organization, I have to understand this stuff well enough to explain it to my boss, who doesn't want to hear any acronyms or any insurance speak, or any of my field accounting speak. I can't talk to him about retained earnings necessarily. I have to, put it in other terms. And I really think there's at least two different kinds of organizations in our country, and they are separating. They're definitely on different roads.
I would agree. The smaller organizations that are more long-term oriented, other than passing it off to family members, what else do you think motivates them to think in the long term?
Well, I had an experience. I was involved intimately in an experience where a guy was building the business to sell it so that he'd have, a retirement vehicle. And the only way to get a good price for it was to make an excellent organization. And an excellent organization can't focus on short term, or you have nothing of value to sell. So, I mean, if you're a small business person, you either are in it, I guess you could be in it to short term make money, but you're not going to make as much money. It's like killing the goose to lay the egg. Okay, you've got to preserve your capital and all that stuff. But your focus either has to be, like the guy that I work for right now, it's third generation family, and they want to keep it in the family, but they also care about the employees. It's a community-based thing.
Yeah.
And most of the people that work there are people that they know, or that they know somebody that knows them. It's all small. It's not like the big city.
Right.
So, you're either trying to develop it because you care about the people that work there, or you care about the future of the company, or you care about selling it so that you can provide wealth for yourself and your heirs.
Interesting. Yeah, and of course the big companies often they'll move the managers around, right? So you get people in charge of people who don't they don't feel responsible for them, right? They just got here, right? These new managers looking to make their mark, and one of the ways you do that is by slashing cost or whatever, get rid of headcount, that kind of thing. So they're much more liable to do the colder things than a family long-term oriented business doesn't. That was kind of interesting when you said the guy was motivated to sell his business, but it worked out because what he wants is a valuable company 25 years from now, right? So he works hard to build it up over the long haul, right? He's always focused on that 25-year goal, not the 2-year or not the 1-year goal. I like that idea. I think that's a much better model, right? Unfortunately, the corporate structure is wired, right? It's going to be difficult for the big companies to do that. I mean, I was consulting at a company one summer, and the manager of a division said they were trying to figure out how to make the division more valuable. So I was teaching them how to do strategic planning, and he said, if we're more valuable sold than staying under our corporate umbrella, then it should be my duty to the shareholders to recommend they sell us off or shut us down. And I went, ouch, that's pretty brutal to talk about your own division as general manager that way, right? And the people at the table were pretty appalled. And I think he just sent us kind of a warning to them that you guys need to make money for the corporation. They're going to sell us off, which I get, right? But it's sort of the focus on avoiding the axe as opposed to let's focus on being long-term successful, which is not the same thing. But yeah, I think the big corporate world has a issue of upper management, how they pick people and how they motivate them. It's very dangerous to start giving these people these short-term motivating things, raise our stock in 6 months, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of tricks you can play. So I don't know. We'll see.
I'll just add, this is Kelly, and I apologize. My video is not working this evening. Can you all hear me well?
Yep, very good.
I was just going to add to that that's what a lot of times in the corporate structure and incentive space, you're going to see short-term incentives to drive performance in that year, and then you're going to have some long-term incentives that are payable later. A lot of times they can be stock oriented at our company because we're private, they're cash, but they're much more built around longevity and long-term goals.
Yeah. Well, that would be good because a lot of people don't have those, right? I hate it when CEOs get these huge bonuses for very short-term results, which sometimes are just there due to manipulation of the finances and by luck of the market, right? So they're getting paid 8 figures for something they may or may not have been involved with, or maybe more smoke and mirrors with the depends on what metric they were being motivated or they're being measured on. But sometimes they just do manipulation inside the company.
It has to do with goal alignment, just like we were talking about with, what's going on with the healthcare situation. If the goals are not aligned properly, or the contracts aren't built to incentivize the right behavior, then everything goes wrong.
Yeah, right.
And right now it's really going wrong for the employee and the employer, but it's going really right for the insurance companies and the pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And when you're talking about a large organization like that with the same problem with goal alignment, I mean, what Kelly was describing is a 360-degree goal alignment program, and the organization is either focused on that or focused on something else. And it kind of comes from the top, I think.
Oh, very much so. All the way from the top, from the board of directors, right? That's why when I said I blame them for the housing crisis the mortgage crisis in 2008, they're the ones who control who runs the banks. So it was their decisions to let it go, let it happen. And when it all played out, it wasn't too hard to figure out someplace it was gonna blow up at the end, which is exactly what happened. So Yeah. I think the big corporations are gonna big corporations and their style of corporate governance is an issue, and I think it's gonna stay an issue. I think it motivates them to do some good things in the short term, but also do some very dangerous things and sometimes some dumb things. But it's very different in the medical world right now, that's for sure. So I do have some, when I teach, I'm the director of the MBA program, and I have some people work in the health industry in the MBA program, and it's kind of interesting to see what they write about in their papers, the pressure they feel working in the business offices, some of the medical places and such. So it's interesting. Okay, before we get out of here today, I just want to review, not due next class, but 2 weeks from now, right? We have an assignment to find an article. Everybody has to find an article and review it. Right, so we're going to review an article concerning organizational change, and I said in the healthcare industry, it no longer has to be a peer review article, just an article about change, organizational change in the healthcare company. So somebody tries to realign their goals, somebody tries to redo their value chain or their supply chain or whatever, some type of major change in the inside. And if it doesn't mean they have to redesign their organization, just how their organization operates, what they're trying to do, how they're trying to go about it. And then as you read this article, think about what are the key lessons learned. Do you think this article is correct on what really happens? No, they're not always, right? Or is it a useful article or not? It's for some reason it's a specialty thing that's probably not going to happen again. You can find all kinds of inappropriate articles. Try to find something that's not more than 5 years old. Your review should be 2 to 4 pages in length, single spaced, right? So single spaced, I think I told you reflective narratives make those double space, but make this single space, so about 2-3 pages, something like that. So make sure you put a citation on the article, so if I want to find it, I can go find it. But tell me what you think of these articles and what they thought about. And again, that's due in on the 17th. I said we're going to have you review those articles and discuss them, but I guess it's the 24th we're going to have that conversation, right? Not the 17th. So we'll probably go around the table, go around the Zoom here, and everybody will get about 5 minutes to tell us what you learned about your article or what you didn't like about the article, so you didn't learn anything from the article. So again, that's due in 2 weeks, in class in 2 weeks, right? And when you write your paper, right, you just click on this hand right here, and then you can submit your assignment to here. Okay?
Hey, Lee.
Yeah.
This is Kelly again. So above that, the reflective narrative number 2 is due the 17th, which is next week. And so this article review is also due on the same date. That's only 1 week, not 2 weeks. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yep, you're exactly right. Right. So this is just, again,
so everything is due in 1 week. And then if we go down to the 24th, we don't have something due other than the panel that we're going to experience. Am I understanding that correctly? Right.
And the reason for that is because I wanted to be able to talk about these articles a little bit before we did the panel, right? And then I was going to have more time on the 24th review these articles, but we're going to have that panel, so that'll be lots of fun, and we're going to do that. And then I'll have some little closeout assignment here on the 24th, which I haven't really designed yet. I'm kind of seeing how the class goes and what might be interesting to do there. But yeah, right now we don't have any assignments for the 24th, except for that panel, to attend for that panel. Okay? Okay. All right. Any more questions, comments? Okay. All right.
Just a comment. I don't know if I'm going to have a comment, and this is totally just throwing a thought out there, because I know we want to have the article review. Is it possible to maybe make the second discussion due the 24th so we don't have the 2 assignments this week, or do you really want them both due next week?
The second.
Just thinking about load balancing.
For
that reflective narrative number 2.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we can move that out a week. That would be easy. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll send out an email to everybody. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'd like to have the articles for the 17th, but yeah, I can move that out a week. Fair enough. You talked me into it. Good negotiator that you are. All right.
Thanks.
See, everybody's smiling now. We'll end the night on a good note. Okay, yeah, I'll go change that right now and send out an email to everybody. When I send out the link for the for tonight's presentation, I'll tell everybody it's now due on the 24th. Okay. All right. On that good note, any other thoughts, questions, comments? That was a good one. All right. So we'll sign off here, and we'll talk to everybody next week. And as always, I'll post these on YouTube and send you the link.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Guys, have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good night.